No.
I can't do this.
Okay.
Hey guys, it's Lily,
And Emma.
and this is Crash Course U.S. History.
Today we're going to be talking about the civil rights movement, which started in the 1950s.
This movement became nationally important in the U.S. as it continued to challenge racial segregation and discrimination through the 1960s.
The Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court case occurred in 1954. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools were unconstitutional.
Oliver Brown filed a lawsuit against the Board of Education of Topeka after his daughter Olivia Brown was denied entrance to Topeka's all-white elementary schools.
Brown claimed that schools for black children were not equal to the white schools, and that segregation violated the so-called Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
This is the case that led to the civil rights movement.
Going down the timeline, on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, an African-American civil rights activist, refused to give up her seat on a public bus to a white passenger in Montgomery, Alabama.
Her following arrest began a protest that was held on December 5th, led by Martin Luther King Jr. He was so successful that it was extended even further during the following months.
Protesters faced threats, arrests, termination from jobs, and violence as a whole. This boycott continued for more than a year. Finally, the Supreme Court ruled that segregated seating was unconstitutional. This federal decision went into effect on December 20th, 1956.
In September, 9 African-American students attended their first day at Little Rock Central High School, whose entire student population consisted of only white students.
The Little Rock Nine, as they came to be called, encountered a large white mob and soldiers from the Arkansas National Guard, sent by Arkansas's government.
The Little Rock Nine returned on September 23rd, but were met with violence. The students were sent home and returned on September 25th, protected by U.S. soldiers. Although the students were continually harassed, 8 of the 9 completed the academic year.
The entire confrontation drew international attention not only to civil rights in the United States, but also to the struggle between federal and state power.
Following this, Eisenhower signed the Civil Rights Act of 1957 into law to help protect voters' rights. This law allowed federal prosecution of those who suppress another's right to vote.
As time went on, sit-in movements became popular. On February 1st, a group of 4 freshmen from Agricultural and Technical College of North Carolina, a historically black college, began a sit-in movement in Greensboro.
The 4 sat at a whites-only lunch counter. They were refused service and were eventually asked to leave. They, however, remained seated until closing and returned the following day with 20 other African-American students.
The sit-in grew over the following weeks, with protesters filling up every seat in the establishment. As protesters were arrested, others would take their places so that the establishment was occupied. The protests spread to other cities.
Throughout 1961, black and white activists known as Freedom Riders took bus trips through the South to protest segregated bus terminals and attempted to use whites-only restrooms and lunch counters.
The Freedom Riders were marked by horrific violence from white protesters. They drew international attention to their cause.
Oh, it's time for the mystery document.
The rules here are simple. We read the mystery document and we guess where it's from, and if we get it wrong, we get shocked. It shall be an unlawful employment practice for an employer to discriminate against any of his employees or applicants for employment, for an employment agency or joint labor management committee controlling apprenticeship or other training or retraining, including on-the-job training programs, to discriminate against any individual.
Or for a labor organization to discriminate any member thereof or applicant for membership, because he has opposed any practice made an unlawful employment practice by this subchapter, or because he has made a charge, testified, assisted, or participated in any manner in an investigation, proceeding, or hearing under this subchapter.
Oh, the Civil Rights Act of 1964!
As time went on, more and more sit-ins went into action. With this, August 28, 1963. Around 250,000 people took part in the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.
Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech as the closing address in front of the Lincoln Memorial, stating, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed."
We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
On July 2, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into law, which prevents employment discrimination due to race, color, sex, religion, or national origin.
Title VII of the Act established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, also known as the EEOC, to help prevent discrimination in the workplace.
On March 7, 1965, in the Selma to Montgomery March, around 600 civil rights marchers walked to Selma, Alabama, to Montgomery, the state's capital, in protest to black voter suppression. Local police blocked and brutally attacked them.
After successfully fighting in court for their right to march, Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders led 2 more marches and finally reached Montgomery on March 25th.
Within the next few months, on August 6, 1965, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
This prevented the use of literacy tests as a voting requirement. This act also allowed federal examiners to review voter qualifications and federal observers to monitor polling places.
On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on his balcony outside his hotel room in Tennessee by a man named James Earl Ray. Ray was convicted of murder a year later in 1969.
President Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1968, also known as the Fair Housing Act, providing equal housing opportunity regardless of race, religion, or national origin.
Civil rights in general enabled African Americans to do most of the things they are able to do today. Things as in greater social and economic mobility across the nations.
It also banned racial discrimination, providing greater access to resources for women, religious minorities, African Americans, and low-income families.
Thanks for watching our crash course. Bye!
Hey guys, it's Lily. And Emma.
Ooh, that's good. Okay. The birds are just gonna be like in the
November 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, an American African. Shush. The rules here are simple.
What?
The brown horse is...
Period. This is the case that led to the civil rights movement.